There are people like that, neglecting the existence of depression, saying that depression kuch nahi hota, hum bhi to aaye. What's your take on that?
Earlier also there were these mental health institutions that had regular inflow of patients. We take family histories also, and in those family histories, it's very evident that in the grandparents or before that, like there are clear-cut signs of mental illnesses which were not recognized. So and so family member घर से निकल गए थे फिर कभी मिले नहीं. And you create this norm within the family, this system which is unset, but everybody in the family abides by that. And if you don't, then there are consequences. I think people are confusing sadness with depression these days. People confuse grieving also with depression. दवाई नहीं होती depression की, दवाई होती है सोने के लिए.
Medicines these are kind of drag you to that point where you can be motivated enough to make those lifestyle changes.
I've decided to hang out with friends more often. But even when I go there, I don't enjoy it. I feel guilty about not doing this for my mental health, but I'm not able to. And it's very hard for the other family member to hear maybe that I don't want to live, I feel my life is not worth living. You don't have to guilt yourself. There's no perfect way to be there for somebody.
What is your take on psychedelic assisted therapy, and is it even legal in India? Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Uncharted Conversations. I'm your host Natasha Singh, and today the episode is going to be a little serious since we are talking about mental health. We have World Mental Health Day just around the corner, and we wanted to dedicate this entire episode on that subject. So just a kind of disclaimer, certain topics you might feel triggered, you might feel a little uneasy or uncomfortable, but the whole and sole purpose of this podcast is that we can provide you with as many insights and information as we can so that you know how to deal with your mental health practices. And today, the guest that we have, Dr. Sneha Sharma. She's a reputed psychiatrist and founder of Anvaya Healthcare. She has contributed to mental health community with her research papers. She has been widely covered in her news articles and TV channels. And I'm really, really looking forward to taking this conversation with her. So let's begin. Hi, Dr. Sneha. Welcome, first of all, to the Uncharted Conversations, and a big, big gratitude to you for doing this episode with us, because I think this is going to be one of the most important episodes that we have shot. Dedicated to World Mental Health Day. This particular episode, of course, we're going to deep dive into mental health. So a huge shout out to you and a big gratitude to you for doing this with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. And I think it's all my pleasure to be here. And I'm excited about the fact that we're talking about mental health and there's so much of conversation happening, and you decided to take on this topic on the event of World Mental Health Day.
Thank you. Okay, so let's begin with the kind of news that we have been seeing lately, right? Especially the theme this time is also workplace. So I would like to start with that. Lately, we have seen, we've been coming across a lot of such news where employees in certain big organizations, and it is sad that they lost their lives owing to stress, owing to burnout. Right? Maybe that could be because of a stroke, but sometimes we've also seen cases where people deliberately take their lives, right? I want to understand it from a psychiatrist standpoint, from someone who is expert in this area, that what exactly does stress, does burnout do to your brain chemically? Like what exactly is released? What happens when your brain is functioning like that over a period of time, and how it is ruining our mental health?
So I think it's a very pertinent topic given the context of what's happening in the news these days, and also in the context of the topic and theme that we have for this year on World Mental Health Day. Definitely, stress is something that we all encounter, and workplace is one area where, owing to certain circumstances, the stress is always going to be there. But what's important to understand here is that there is acute stress, and then there is a different thing which is chronic stress, which would be stress that goes on over a period of time without maybe fluctuating as much, or keeps on increasing over a period of time, so that the individual does not have a time to decompress. And that chronic stress is what is the major issue, because as we work or even in our personal lives, we'll always have stress and challenges. So stress is not negative all the time. We have a term called as stress, which is positive stress. And positive stress means that, of course, you're challenged, so you tend to come out of your comfort zone, you grow, and you develop resilience, and all of that is in sync with your coping capacities, so that you, over a period of time, you become a new person. Like, you have a purpose and you're growing, and that gives you a sense of identity. It also increases your confidence. So not that stress is not bad. But if there's a stress which is constantly going on, and you are struggling with other areas of your life also because of this particular aspect, and that chronic stress then gives rise to burnout. And that burnout is what usually either manifests as mental health symptoms and or physical health symptoms. So what essentially happens is that when we are faced with some sort of challenge, be it physical or mental, there's a certain changes in the hormonal level of the body. So certain hormones, which are known as stress hormones like cortisol, increase in the body. They increase neurotransmitters like adrenaline, epinephrine. So those increases basically allow the body to be ready to face the challenge.
Just like fight or flight.
Yeah, so fight and flight comes in because the body's preparing to face that challenge, and it's not problematic. But if that sort of a chronic stress, which leads to persistent cortisol release, if that happens, then body is in a state of chronic stress. And that's when it's constantly taking out the resources from the body rather than giving it time to replenish. So then that impact of that entire cortisol is that it increases inflammation in the body. And that inflammation is responsible for the physical symptoms that we often feel. If people are having stroke, if they are having hypertension, if they are having heart attack, those are the things which chronic inflammation in the blood vessels is leading to plaque formation. It's leading to hypertension. Blood sugar is not manageable. Insulin resistance comes in because of the increased cortisol. So all of that is responsible for the physical health going down. And then, of course, the mental health, because of the direct mental implication of being in chronic stress, which is you're not sleeping as well, you're not eating as healthy, you are constantly your attention, focus, productivity is struggling. Then you're in a low mood constantly. You don't feel as looking forward to the day. Over a period of time, you stop enjoying even the things that you would enjoy, right? Like what we see in chronic burnout is that if I enjoy a movie, now I'm not, even when I'm outside of work, I can't switch off and I can't look at the movie. I'll constantly be thinking about what happens next, what do I do? So that anticipation, that anxiety then brings up, depression comes in the extreme, it leads to people, making a decision to end their own lives as they see no way out of that situation. So essentially, that's how this stress thing can cause problems in the workplace.
So what exactly should workplaces should be doing about it? Because I feel anyone who's going through stress, what they're looking for is maybe like a safe space and also a period where they can relax, right? What should workplaces be doing to make sure that as long as there's healthy stress, it's okay, but it doesn't reach to that point that they feel burnout? What should be some effective strategies according to you?
So I think when workplaces and employers look at what they can do to ensure that there's not chronic stress on their employees, one of the important thing that needs to be highlighted is that the structure of how the population worked has changed over the years. So earlier, maybe one family member was in charge of earning money and would be going to a different workplace where the rest of the things somebody else in the household was taking care of. Right? Now we have more of a system where many people within that same household are working, and they're also taking care of household responsibilities or child rearing responsibilities and caregiving of other family members. So with that in mind, it has to be taken into account that people will have life outside of work and more responsibilities outside of work. So it's not like the resilience of people have fallen down. What you commonly hear people lamenting, a different generation saying that we used to work for 16 hours, or there were statements of 70 hours a week should be the work now. You have to understand that it just applies to a certain privileged section, which has the benefit of, relying on somebody for other invisible labor that's happening. So workplaces firstly need to acknowledge this aspect of change that's happening over the years. And that with that in mind, I think the work life cutoff between, what are the working hours, how much of work you are expecting people to do outside of those work hours, what are the things that you're doing as a company to make your employees' life better. So if you want their productivity to be high, then a lot of corporates, I think, when I hear from certain individuals in Bangalore, like what they do is that there are child care centers within the company. So then you are ensuring that that sort of a responsibility is not something that the parent is worried about. The meals are and wholesome, nutritious meals are being offered, so that that aspect has been taken care of. So these are different ways in which, like, definitely you look at, it might appear on the surface as a more expense for the company, but you have to, over a period of time, realize that there are evidence and statistics and research stating that all of this in fact increases the loyalty, retention, the amount of productivity that comes in, and in the long run it has economic benefits for the places that are offering them. So that's one aspect to it. And then the other aspect, I think, is what we can do as individuals, on one-on-one for people, is I think respectful environment more than anything, to create an environment where nobody is looked down upon, discriminated. There's less of stigma. As a one-on-one, people feel free to reach out, share their concerns, flag their concerns, sort of a thing has to be ensured. Then whatever like drawbacks are happening, or if you see somebody lagging behind, then the appropriate support needs to be provided to at least, like, before you see if somebody is reprimanded or not. So before those sort of extreme measures to come in for an adult, there need to be support that has to come in. And so these are some of the ways in which individuals and in a company, and the company as a whole, can ensure that workplace stress is at bay. And then, of course, talking regular talks about, I think I'm so passionate about mental health, that ensuring that there are workshops, people do understand that what are the signs of early illnesses, recognizing it, reaching out for help, not feeling ashamed in seeking out help, would ensure that whoever has developed some sort of a problem is reaching out for help at a sooner time.
Right. I feel with workplaces, I feel what workplaces need to do is just make it easier for people to come as a whole person, right? We have these metrics that kind of decide our performance, and which are so externalized. What I feel we don't take into consideration is that there's this person who has a history, who has like a certain set of temperament, has had a certain set of upbringing. When it comes to workspaces, I feel we just kind of try to bucket them under one category, totally forgetting that these are also the factors. Like you very rightly said, we should, like, the environment should be such that there is no pressure that, I have to switch on my professional mode and I have to switch off all the baggage and insecurities that I'm coming with. It should be in a way that the workplace culture should be also helping them becoming a better person internally, so that when they show up, they know that they're going to a place where they feel fulfilled, not just professionally, but also somewhere it also impacts them at a very personal level. Right. And I think that's the reason a lot of organizations now are taking very proactive steps in ensuring that there are, like you said, there are workshops, there are so many activities that they do just to keep that happy hormone high, I feel.
Yes.
Right. But when you spoke about this recent statement that people should be working 70 hours a week, so I came across this very interesting study which said that as in generation Gen Z, basically, they are actually opting for mental health and mental peace over higher salaries. They are people who would want to retire by 35 and would want like more flexible environment. What I am able to see is that these two polarities right now as we speak, right? Because people from that generation who made such statements, they're still in the game, right? And they have seen the, I would say, benefits of working like that. But then lately, the whole dialogue around mental health and this whole movement has caught up such such speed that now we have our Gen Z, who I think people of this generation, they're more aware and more, I think, open about discussing such things. What is your take on that? Like, because these are literally two polar ends right now.
Yes.
What is your take on that?
See, what I think, if you look at it historically, what the previous generation who are probably the bosses right now, and what they've seen is that we were coming up from a state where there were world wars happening. There was a lot of poverty. There were a lot of struggles that were happening. Now, that whole economy wise also, things have changed for a bit of a certain segment of the country. I'll say that still there's a certain segment who's willing to do work as 70 hours a week, and given that, because there is a dearth of resources for them, and then what is fueling them is that they need to better their lifestyle, they need to move ahead. So when we look at even the Maslow's need, like the hierarchy of needs, we see that initially, yes, people who don't have the basic things would struggle, and that they're ready to do whatever it takes to meet their basic needs. But over a period of time, once the basic needs have been met, so certain individuals, Gen Z, for example, some individuals are coming from backgrounds where maybe they don't have money to splurge, but there's a certain reassurance in terms of financial security. So to think that if I have this much, and if I restrict my means, and then if I bring in freedom with the money that I have, so that allows that segment to understand that, this is not what I'm looking for. So I think that is discrepancy in beliefs system, and this extreme poles that we are seeing is because of they're coming from two extreme set of backgrounds and experiences in life, and then this is where the clash is happening. But I feel also the younger generation is what will prevail. Yes, at the end of the day, because they're demanding things, and in a way it makes me really happy that there's extreme focus on not just making money or for the economy to move forward, but also on individual well-being that was neglected for the longest time.
Right. A couple of years ago, there was this very prominent personality from the sports world who happened to speak about mental health, actually, literally kind of, I wouldn't say dissing, but kind of, neglecting the existence of depression, saying that depression kuch nahi hota, hum bhi to aaye the, and all. And there are people like that. When I speak to people in my family of that age, right, I've heard literally the same kind of comments that, we didn't have time to think about all of this. We just needed to get work done. We had family, we had responsibilities. When you come across people like that, because depression it's a very severe thing, right? So it is for real. When you come across people like that, what exactly would you like to tell them? Like, what's your take on that?
So I think where they're coming from is, of course, for the longest time historically, mental health has been seen as a character flaw or a weakness of willpower. But what is not realized, and I think I would like to say that sort of a mindset still exists in bits and segments of even with the current generation, and I think where they're coming from is that they have very little experience or around an individual who has gone through a mental health struggle. I would either call them lucky, or I would say that, they have to be thankful that sort of a thing did not fall on them or somebody around them. But just because we've not personally had an exposure of something doesn't say that it did not exist earlier. Right? The whole fact is that earlier also there were these mental health institutions that had a regular inflow of patients, and then there were still histories. Like I was mentioning earlier, we take histories and we try to understand an individual who's coming to us, we take family histories also. And in those family histories, it's very evident that in the grandparents or before that, there are clear-cut signs of mental illnesses which were not recognized. Right? So there is you still get history of suicide. You still get history of a younger family member dying by suicide. Nobody talks about it because it's a taboo. So there are family members who not discuss that, which is what the rest of the family believes, that, they died of something we don't remember. but it's usually it's usually like a indicator of mental illness. The other thing is that in those case times, severe mental illnesses, when not treated, would essentially mean that the person would become really sick. And then either they would be sent to asylums that existed and that is not in use anymore, but that sort of a thing, or the individual would leave the house. So like the homelessness that used to happen, or you hear history of so and so family member घर से निकल गए थे फिर कभी मिले नहीं.
Right.
That's a very common history you hear. What was actually happening there was an undiagnosed mental illness which was not recognized, not rightly, adequately treated, and that is what happened. So it's not like those illnesses don't exist anymore. Of course, with the current stressors that we see, it's changed over the years. Definitely, maybe depression and anxiety are on the rise, but severe mental illnesses and mental illnesses have always existed. Just because they're being recognized right now, being intervened right now, there's so much of discussion happening, that doesn't increase the prevalence. That just means we are more aware about it.
That's true. Right. You spoke about something that, people have had family histories. Is it what exactly we call intergenerational trauma? Would you like to highlight on that?
So I think intergenerational trauma, when we talk about that, that's a different thing than having somebody with a history of mental illness in their family. What intergenerational trauma would essentially mean that if there is an undiagnosed mental illness, or if there are certain set patterns and of behaviors in the family, or emotional reactions in the family, or the way certain family members take on certain roles, and then everybody is supposed to like stick to that script. That's intergenerational trauma. So even if I might have a different opinion about something, I am not free to voice my opinion. My voice is not acknowledged. My emotions are not validated because we as a family behave this way. So, again, in context of mental illness, a lot of times people would say ki ghar ki baat ghar mein rakho.
Right.
Right? If there is like abuse happening, why do you have to tell the neighbor? Right? Why do you have to? But the point is that these silenced voices, and you create this norm within the family, this system which is unsaid, but everybody in the family abides by that. And if you don't, then there are consequences, right? And then usually one individual who then refuses to face the stand to that, and would stand up to that and oppose it, would be the outcast person. But essentially, this person is then deciding that no, this is not a norm. We are not like 30 members in a family are not going to all have the same makeup in terms of their personalities, point of view, experiences with life. And a family that does not really accommodate everybody is then the intergenerational trauma that's passed on. So that becomes the context when we talk about, mothers telling their daughters कि ऐसे ही होता है शादियों में, right? Your husbands ऐसे ही react करते हैं.
Wolf conditioning.
And,
you
over a period
family
of time.
Culture, basically.
Yes, you hide behind that as a culture, but actually it's not a culture. So there are cultural things, and I don't want to offend anybody, but there are cultural things, and we really respect that. But then to say that tolerating abuse and silencing somebody is our culture is then very unfair on an individual who's suffering, even though it might benefit the system at large.
Right. Yeah. So coming back to the depression point that we were speaking about, do you think, because I feel that the term depression is now used so frivolously, right? Even by people who are not going through depression, that are mujhe to depression ho gaya, itna kaam hai, right? It's used so frivolously that it has two impacts. One is I feel that the help doesn't reach to people who should actually be helped. And second, do you think, as an expert, that the whole it's like we are overdoing it right now? Do you think that it is stripping away the resilience also in people, that people are becoming a little bit more softer? Do you think that?
Not exactly. I would disagree with that statement about people becoming softer. I think definitely people are becoming more mindful and respectful and empathetic, and I don't see that sort of a mindset as a weakness, because trying to understand somebody else's perspective, accommodating that, and not like, surviving it out shouldn't be the norm. As a civilization, if we are progressing, then we need to have lesser and lesser animal-like behavior, I feel. That's one thing. And when it comes to, like you correctly said about depression being used very lightly, yes, that's true. Because I think people are confusing sadness with depression these days, right? And then the words are interchangeably used. So when somebody says that I have depression, what they probably mean is that they've been sad, right? Unless some clinician has diagnosed them, and unless some mental health professional has given them a diagnosis, it's wrong to use that word, right? To describe your problems. And but at the same time, I think this general discussion around depression and anxiety is also creating awareness. So even if somebody would casually in a conversation say I'm depressed, when they're going to if they are going to or reaching out to a mental health professional, they'll be correctly diagnosed. And if they don't have depression, then they are told so, that on a spectrum, all of these mental illnesses exist, and like mood. So sadness is an aspect of an emotion. But when that emotion overflows to sort of impact your behavior also, it starts impacting a lot of other aspects of your biological functioning, and it is outside of your control. Then it's no more sadness. You feel that no matter what you do, you're not able to come out of it, feel happy, feel differently. That is when a diagnosis of a disorder is more likely.
It's just like prolonged sadness we're talking about.
Not just, like I said, it's not just prolonged sadness. So I might feel sad over certain events, like for example, certain events like loss of a loved one or some challenge is bound to make us feel sad. If we miss them over a period of time, we are bound to become sad over a period of time. Like, whenever we miss them, we'll be sad. That's not depression. But so people confuse grieving also with depression. That's not true. That's a normal, natural process, and it should be respected as such. And a person who's grieving should not be expected to, move on with your life. That would be pathological, right? But at the same time, depression has other behavioral traits. Like if you're feeling sad, it will not probably affect how you're eating over a period of time. You're sad today, you might not eat today, you don't feel like eating, but over a period of time, it's not impacted your appetite where you don't feel like eating at all, you're losing weight, you want to sleep, but you can't sleep over a period of time. So, and then it starts impacting your workplace performance, it starts impacting your taking care of yourself, it starts impacting your body energy levels, there's a general sense of fatigue that comes in. If there are negative thoughts, so, once in a while having a thought that kya hoga future mein, I don't know if I'll be able to do it or not, versus like persistent thoughts of I can't do it, I won't be able to do it, future mein kuch nahi bacha hai, kuch nahi ho payega. So those themes, so it's a clinical diagnosis and a clinician would help, but it's not just purely sadness over a period of time. It has other implications and other areas that it's affecting, which is when I think if you see that happening to somebody around you, you need to reach out for help.
Right. Inside Out did a very beautiful, I think, storytelling of also conveying this, that sadness is important, right?
Absolutely.
When you were talking about all these, range of emotions, I really felt, and I want to ask this: do you think sadness is healthy? Like, is it healthy to be sad, and in what healthy ways sadness actually helps us? If you can touch upon that.
Sadness is one of the many emotions, and if you're not feeling that emotion, then of course you're not exploring the full spectrum of being a human, right? So to say that sadness is an illness is, I think that's where the misconception around depression comes in. A lot of earlier generation might feel कि उदास तो हम भी होते थे परेशान, but this generation is probably saying कि उदास ही नहीं होना चाहिए. And
वो भी गलत है कि उदास ही नहीं होना
चाहिए. And that's unreasonable to expect, and a lot of mental illness also stems from that. So you see social media, Instagram, positive vibes only.
Toxic positivity.
So toxic. So that is not possible. And then to have that sort of a expectation from anyone and from even yourself that you are supposed to be happy all the time is wrong. You can't be happy all the time. And you will feel all these emotions, and all of these emotions are telling you something about what's happening in your body and around you, and how experiences that you're having fall within the preview of maybe your value system. So the anger will tell you that something injustice is happening. right? Something wrong is happening. Sadness would tell you that, you're missing a certain aspect of things and you're sad about it. And that needs to be felt.
So that's basically your kind of clue to acknowledge and address that, this is where it's coming from, this is where it's getting triggered, and you need to kind of look at it.
And you need to look at it and you need to feel it, and not like, have an unhealthy attachment to any of the emotions.
Tell us what exactly are the predictors of depression, and also when we say that, again, does depression need to have a cause? Because whatever we've seen so far, anyone who's spoken about depression, they always say that, it's like a switch, something just goes off, right? And then you don't feel like doing anything. But what exactly are the predictors of depression? And yeah, what would you like?
So I think what's depression and how a person ends up in depression can have multiple reasons. So uh, we don't have a reductionist approach or view here where we say that this particular thing led to depression, right? Again, I think a lot of people have this belief that something goes wrong in their lives and this led to depression. It's a confluence, a lot of complex factors that either leads to an illness or leads to health, right? So those factors could be genetic. One of the important factor is genetic, even for physical health, for mental health. And if there is a predisposition, if there is a genetic risk already existing about developing depression, which means that there is a family history, there's a higher chance that you might have it. And similarly, like besides the genetic aspect of it, there are individual factors, like, an individual's own genetic makeup, which can be very different from familial factors that they are carrying. So that is another, either a predisposing factor or would become a protective factor. Similarly, the environment. And when we look at environment, we want to talk about how growing up years also have long-term implications about how a person manages their emotions or develop resilience. So those early developmental years also are said to have an impact on how your risk of developing mental illnesses later in life. And then definitely the environment you are in at that point of time. So all of these broad factors, and then the minute things within them. So even like temperamental reactions that I would have would determine that even two individuals within the same family can have different risk of depression. So it's a multifactorial thing, and not one single factor could be picked up and pointed out, and the risk is different for different factors. So which is where I think when we look at it from a science point of view, we try to address the things which are in our control. So we can't control our genetics, we can't control our family history, right? But we can control how a person is, what sort of environment a person is getting raised in. We can control the environment that we are providing to somebody as an adult. And then of course the neurobiological makeup of that person, which is like the neurotransmitters and the that we are talking about, the hormones. So that aspect is where things go wrong or go right, and that's the aspect that medicines can control, or that is the aspect which like science helps you with. Then there's a certain, like I said, temperamental reactions or resilience or coping. This is where the psychological aspect of things will help. So if you build your resilience over a period of time, be in therapy, identify a risk, modify your behaviors, would ensure that that risk is mitigated. So those are the ways and those are the factors in which you can either increase the risk or decrease the risk. Not all factors are in our control, but some of them are. So I think how, if you want to understand depression, it's really complex, and so is every mental illness, because when we look at the brain, there is a structural brain integrity, and then there is functional things happening within the brain. So it's like a building, which is your brain, and then there are multiple offices, departments working in different ways. So to break it down into a very simplistic thing, like this department is not working well, is very reductionist approach. It's like saying, because the entire brain works together to ensure that our mood is well, our, how we are reacting to things, how we are remembering things, how focus, our attention is being is happening cognitively. So, but still, we've been able to say that there are certain areas which work on mood or regulate mood more than other areas. We are saying that certain areas where memory is being stored, even though that's not the only area. So, like that, we've tried to pinpoint things, and there is a certain area in the brain where mood is being regulated. And that area, within that area, there are neurotransmitters that are secreted. So neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine that we hear about, and I think most people now, thanks to social media, have heard about it, is that's where the signaling is happening. So the neurotransmitters are not just in that area of the brain, they are everywhere. But that area of the brain is responsible for mood, and that's where the signaling is happening. So we are talking about serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine in that particular area. And that's where if there is depression, then it's been seen that the concentration of these things, and it's like, there's a messenger, and that messenger is received by somebody, and then the information transmits. So even if there is a lot of messengers, but the message is not being received, that would lead to depression.
Oh.
So what medications essentially do is that within that area, they increase the receptor sensitivity to that. So they increase the ability of the brain to receive that message. And for some time, they also increase the messenger in that area. So that, that messengers are there. If after a point of time, those messengers are not acknowledged, the brain has a system of degrading it. It goes out as a toxin. So the medications would increase the duration the messenger is there. So there's a higher chance of the medicine being received, the signal being received, and that then leading to further changes. So when the mood symptoms happen, then the effect, so the neurotransmitters act very locally, and the hormones, they act all over the body. So hormones are released at one part of the body, and then they go all over the body, and they regulate multiple functions. So this is where the neurotransmitter will then change, let's say, the hormone release. This is where the cortisol that we'd mentioned earlier comes into the picture. It's one of the many hormones. So then the cortisol or the thyroid is another hormone. They also regulate mood. So it's a very complex thing that comes in. But what medicines do is that at different areas in this pathway, they regulate the functioning in such a way that over a period of time, it has been seen to improved outcomes in terms of mood, in terms of focus, attention, in terms of negative thoughts, negative cognition, so or anxiety getting reduced. So this is how medication, the role of medicines become important. That sometimes when we talk about lifestyle changes, that's all good. And I think I want to reiterate this point here, where people assume that if you're coming to a doctor and the doctor is giving you medicines, it doesn't mean कि आपको meditation नहीं करना है, right? They say we'll do correct it by yoga, we'll correct it. And my point is that you do that. Of course you do that. You have a healthy lifestyle, you sleep well, you have friendships, you go and do physical activity. But since that has not worked, or because you've not done that so far, but the implications are happening right now.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe 6 months down the line, you change your lifestyle and things get better and you improve. But if you're not doing that right now, it has implications beyond just the present. Right? So this is where people don't acknowledge that if I'm sad, or I'm not sad, I think depressed clinically, or I have anxiety disorder like clinically, it's not about 6 महीने बाद अपने आप ठीक हो जाओगे. उस 6 महीने में you've not been able to pay attention to your child. Your relationship with your spouse has gotten worse. Office, you've reacted, or you've been irritable or reacted in such a way that you are not in the same place anymore. People don't have the same opinion about you. Your productivity has declined to such a level which it'll have far-reaching consequences. 6 months is a long time. And then the physical aspects of that anxiety itself leading to physical illnesses. So 6 महीने में आप ठीक भी हो जाओगे, but ये 6 months also is a period of time when you're losing a lot many things, and because you're not acting, you're creating further problems for yourself.
Right. I think what we don't take into consideration, and in fact, you can elaborate on that how depression looks like what a person exactly goes through when one hits a depression. Because I feel, despite the fact that it's a lifestyle change and you can control it through so many changes that you can adapt to, but I feel when you are in that phase, you don't want to do anything, right?
You can't
You
actually.
can't,
Yeah.
like they say that the switch goes off when
Yes.
you're not finding that joy and motivation to do anything. Then how would you have that willingness to even adapt to a lifestyle change? I think that's why medicines kind of, these are like kind of like drag you to that point, that
Yes.
now you are in that stage where you can by your own self be motivated enough to make those lifestyle changes,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So how does it look like what does, for someone to even identify that they're going through a depression, for people who are, in the family, if someone wants to differentiate that this person is having like a momentary or fleeting phase, or this person is actually in depression, what exactly should one look for?
I think the primary thing is definitely a change of behavior. So if somebody has been a certain way for majority of their lives, and suddenly you see a behavior which is out of place, even for that person, right? And it's sort of continuing. So that means that it's not deliberate most of the times. There is some stressor happening, but that behavior is a deviance from how they were earlier. That's a general indicator of if there is a mental illness, out of many indicators. So that deviation from their normal behaviors, or how they used to react or not react. So some people might become withdrawn completely. Some people who were gregarious by nature might become, you suddenly see them speaking less. So there is no standard of how much you should speak. But if you were a certain way earlier, and now because of certain reasons you're a different way, and you're not happy with that change, it's not a deliberate change you're bringing in, right? So I might decide that I want to bring in this change in my lifestyle where am less reactive.
Hmm.
Then it's a deliberate change. So it's not a indicator of illness. But if I feel that, I sit in settings, I want to enjoy, I sit with my friends, but I can't laugh, I can't feel myself involved in those conversations, no matter how hard I try. So those sort of things coming in, which can at some point and does become distressing even to the person who's experiencing it. So another thing is that if you are deliberately bringing in some change in your lifestyle, you'll not be distressed by that change. But a person with depression would be distressed by how they are feeling initially, right? So with depression or with any illness, there's a gradation. So illnesses usually start with mild, then progress to moderate and severe. So the symptoms look different in terms of intensity for each of that phase. So milder depression, people might still report that, I'm trying so hard to come out of this. I'm thinking ki exercise kar lete hain. I am thinking of I'm watching shows. I've decided to hang out with friends more often. But even when I go there, I don't enjoy it. Even if I'm running, I can't. I know I want to run, but I keep cribbing about it. Shame myself into it. Feel guilty about not doing this for my mental health, but I'm not able to. So this is where the fatigue comes in, that aspect. So those are the things which can tell you, a bit about whether this is uh, a possibly indicator of a disorder, something going on with the person which might not be in their control anymore. And to label that behavior as lazy is you are also shaming the person. A lot of people use this strategy to make family members come out of depression, to shame them into it. To if somebody is having a bad habit, you try to shame that person. Shame would essentially mean that that person goes more and more into their yeah.
What are some of the most absurd misconceptions that you've heard about depression? Myths or misconceptions?
About depression. So one of the things I think which I find really absurd, because probably because I'm a psychiatrist, and I is that people believe and that medicines are for sleeping. They feel that दवाई नहीं होती डिप्रेशन की, दवाई होती है सोने के लिए, that you medicate them ताकि वो सोते रहेंगे and फिर वो मतलब ठीक हो जाएंगे या सोते रहेंगे तो उन्हें पता नहीं होगा कि क्या हो रहा है. That is one misconception, because we have so many people who are in high performing respectful places, and and they are on medications and functioning in perfect as per their capabilities and as per their want, they are doing well. And the second I think thing is that it's a character weakness and willpower नहीं है, या अगर और आप एक्सरसाइज करोगे या आप और रूटीन बनाओगे तो आप डिप्रेशन से बाहर आ जाओगे. दैट ऑल्सो आई फील इज अ लाइक आई नो इज अ मिसकंसेप्शन दैट एग्जिस्ट, एंड दोज पीपल आर कमिंग फ्रॉम अ राइट प्लेस. बट वॉट दे डोंट रियलाइज इज दैट इलनेस के लिए हेल्दी लाइफस्टाइल जरूरी है, और हेल्दी लाइफस्टाइल आपको इलनेस में पहुंचने से प्रिवेंट करेगी. आप पहुंच गए हैं तो हेल्प करेगी टू कम आउट. बट वंस यू रीच्ड एन इलनेस, that might not be sufficient to come out of it, right? So if I have myself diagnosed myself as depressed, and then I start to do yoga, for example, and then I say my yoga made me better. So that is not, there's no evidence there. That's a anecdotal, you've just implemented, there was no clinical trial happening. And there is long data, like long-term data with vast data saying that this exists. And there are people who you would not label as weak in any way, who have gone through depression. And just because of this stigma, people don't completely feel free to come out and say that, yes, I've gone through this.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. What do you think? Because, like you said, that it's more like lifestyle induced. So, what kind of lifestyle should one be practicing as it is to kind of prevent oneself from reaching that stage? Because when you rose that medicines point, right? And you're right about it. I also feel that, and I'll I would really like to confess that I think when you don't have sufficient knowledge, even I used to be someone who's like, but medicine se kya hoga? It's just more of a lifestyle. I used to think like that, but then someone actually sat me down and made me understand that when you are in that phase, you don't want to even have. I mean, you don't even want to have medicines, and going for a lifestyle change is like such a leap that you were taking.
Yes.
That at that point of time, it's just beyond your control, right? So for anyone to even reach that stage, I would like to ask you that what kind of self-care practices, what should be the kind of lifestyle we should be following regularly only, so that we don't reach that stage.
So I think I want to correct myself if I earlier gave that impression that lifestyle changes or poor lifestyle would be the only contributing factor to any illness, not just depression, any mental illness or physical illness, but lifestyle plays a major role. Right? And lifestyle has a lot of components to it. So not everybody can control all the components, but you can try to identify factors that you can control, and then you can work on those. And there is no like 100% ye kara to risk nahi hoga and 100% ye kiya to risk hoga. There are, like I said, 100 factors that would probably lead you to have depression, and 100 factors that lead you to not have depression. If you can control maybe like 50 of them, 40 of them, and you can work on that, that's good enough. So a lot of people develop anxiety from wanting to control everything, even the factors of illnesses. A lot of those factors are beyond your control. A lot of people also get that fear, if I am working 8 hours a day and then I have other responsibilities, and for some reason, maybe I'm not eating, I'm not able to work out every day. But I am, whenever I get a chance, like 3 or 4 times a day, I do work out. So then not having that guilt is also important, because you have to identify kitna ho sakta hai. Because at the end of the day, even if you want to exercise and that's putting you under stress, and that, and you're compromising and you're under stress and not sleeping, that happens a lot. I hear that from people, that just because they are they want to work out, also they want to work, they are ambitious and they want to work and all of that, they'll compromise on the sleep. 5 घंटे सो रहे हैं, 3 घंटे सो रहे हैं. That's not going to help you. So certain aspects, everything has to be done in moderation and whatever is possible. So there will be times, 3 months in your life when you're not maybe eating as nutritious for whatever reason. But you can compensate later. Those 3 months would not set things in stone. But at the same time, whenever you can, eat healthy. Whenever you can, try to have a workout. Whenever you can, get good sleep. Whenever you can, try to have social connections also. So another thing is this, social connections, and I want to highlight this point because there's a general, again, that belief that I need to meet my friends because otherwise, I'm not developing social connections, or I'm not being social enough, and that's also important for mental health.
And I'm not taking out time for myself.
And then people would make that a stress point, right? So what social connection means is that you can just call somebody. And even once a week you speak to somebody is good social connection, as long as you feel that there's security there, there's relationship, attachment, all of that. And it doesn't have to be fit a certain bill to look healthy. So that unhealthy obsession with health is also wrong. It's another form of anxiety. So holistically, whatever factors in your control, and the most important, I think the point that I want to highlight over and over again is, there's no unique thing about depression that you want to do differently than not getting anxiety. Like, for example, there's no lifestyle change that is specific to depression. There's no lifestyle change which is specific to anxiety or specific to diabetes. You need to have a general lifestyle, and it's that simple and that hard, that these are the general things. There's no like hidden mantra somewhere. And but the point is, people would look for like sudden solutions, and that give me one tip that would do it. But it's that simple. It's existed all these years, and everybody knows it. The point is, you have to start executing some of it.
Right. What would you suggest for family members of someone who's going through depression? Because I feel that, typically I've heard also that experts suggest that, this person should be like, to the caregivers, that this person should be surrounded with more love. This person should have his or her own personal safe space, so that that person can come out. But I feel so much of energy, so much of bandwidth of even those people who are close to them goes in just kind of making sure that this person is coming out. And I feel somewhere even their mental health is impacted, because they're not professionals, they're not equipped to handle that, right? What would you suggest for family members of such people? What should they do in such situations?
I think, again, like a very relevant question, because we are moving away from the illness, and we also looking to involve the family in as a unit in it, and those who want to support people with mental illnesses. So depression, if you feel somebody is going through any mental illness and you want to support them, I think the best thing is to be there. And to be there means that you need to be approachable. There need to be an open line channel of communication where this person feels free to come out and say things about how they're feeling, and to not take those feelings personally, right? To say that and it's very hard to for the other family member to hear maybe that I don't want to live, I feel my life is not worth living. So it's definitely hard. But to say that, why are you having these thoughts, or your life is so sorted, look at what all you have and look at what people don't have, that all comes from wanting to defend your position and say. So I think a person with depression, it's not like they can't see all of that. It's in spite of that. And what you need to ensure is that there's more space to hear those conversations, and those conversations could be making you also uncomfortable. So but you still have to create that space. I think that's the biggest responsibility. And then taking time, so you can take time out when you don't feel you're not ready for that conversation, or you're not available for them. So having other people also as a support system, ensuring that there's a system rather than one individual who's being relied on. And then if not, please involve the mental health professional. So I understand that in nuclear families it can become really difficult, but that's the one aspect where you can involve a mental health professional. You can have a therapist that you speak to. You can have a doctor that you when you're going and discussing, you are there, you can understand ways to support this person.
Because I think they need to build a lot of resilience. I've literally come across cases, and I've seen stories like that, where, again, talking about nuclear families, right, where people had to quit their jobs so that they can be emotionally there for those people, which is, I mean, not just emotionally overwhelming, because I'm sure that there would be times that even they would want to get angry and they're just suppressing
Yes.
it, or they
Yes.
just want to talk to someone that, I'm not able to handle it. Like, we all have that weak and vulnerable moment, but they have to be strong, at least at that moment.
Yes, I think, yeah, you've pinpoint that exactly, where yes, this could be a problem. But I think whenever there are these moments of outbursts, even for a person who's a caregiver, you don't have to guilt yourself. There's no perfect way to be there for somebody, right? So if you're not, at the end of the day, you're human. You have your own set of like ideas about how your life would have charted, looked like, and then this certain inevitable thing might have put that, like, or offset that a bit. But you have to integrate that into what is happening, and then identify the factors which, again, I think you can control, and there are certain factors that are outside your control. And then uh, letting, once in a while, you need to have your own space of comfort. You need to have your, like I mentioned, those lifestyle changes that we spoke about. If you're a caregiver, then it becomes really important that you take care of your physical health and mental health as well, because at some point that will also have an implication of how much support you are able to give to this person. And this is where I think we have to share the caregiving responsibilities. It's unfair to be only on one person. And as I think it's not just about mental illness, physical illness is also, having a family member or a loved one struggling with any illness per se can be really challenging. And but I think that's a responsibility we take, isn't it? Like, for each other. And yeah, so we have to be ready for it, and at the same time understand that it's not easy to accept that.
Okay. There was a very interesting study that I came across, which said that depression is also related to geography of the place. And that kind of blew me away. So, would you like to talk about it? How?
So yes, like, if you look at scientific data, then certain areas have more higher incidence and higher prevalences of depression, and or mood disorders. And the reason that's usually attributed is that while if we try to control other factors like economy, we try to control other socioeconomic factors, then there are certain things which have sort of come to light, and sun is one of the reasons. So different geographical places would have different sun exposure in terms of during different seasons, and the length of the day also varies depending on the season that's there. So the sun, or the natural sunlight, determines the circadian rhythm, which is sort of the rhythm based on which a lot of biological functions operate in. And that biological rhythm, or the circadian rhythm, also determines our mood. So in a way, sunlight is also plays a certain role in how we feel, what our mood is. And places which have lower exposure to sun, especially like certain months, colder months, have higher rates of depression. Countries like Canada, UK, have European countries, Scandinavian countries with lesser exposure to sun have higher rates of depression. And this is how geography comes into play when it comes to mental illnesses.
Now we are moving to a little bit. I mean, this entire conversation has been very serious, but now I think it's more intense. I would like to say that, what we're going to cover now, it can be triggering for some, but our intention over here is that we just want to provide you with as much information that you can have so that you know how to deal with it. So I wanted to speak about suicidal tendencies. We have seen people taking their lives, right? And I want to understand how much of it is connected with depression, and how much, I mean, does depression always lead to suicidal tendencies, or one can have suicidal tendencies even without having depression? The reason being, we have lately, we saw a lot of artists, a lot of celebrities in music industry, right? uh, they took their lives, right? And on the outside, they didn't look depressed. For example, if I speak about Robin Williams, he'd always came across as such a happy and joyful and a humorous guy. And like they say, some of the happy faces hide some of the most intense pains, right? So when you look at someone who doesn't look like that this guy is having depression, right? But still they took such a drastic step. So from that viewpoint, I wanted to understand that, is depression related to suicidal tendencies, and can one have suicidal tendencies even without having depression? And what is that trigger? What is that push where one feels like, there's nothing left for me now to look forward to anything in life, and they just want to take away their life?
Right. So I think I would like to break this down into two aspects. Suicidal tendencies could mean, wanting to end your life, and having strong thoughts about it and leading to action around that behavior. there is also a certain form of self-harm that happens, which with not the intention is not dying, right? So there are certain people who might indulge in behaviors that are harmful to them, and that might look like, either cutting themselves or overdosing on certain things, but the intention there is not to die, right? And we term that clinically as deliberate self-harm. Okay, so when we talk about suicidal ideations or somebody wanting to end their lives, even suicidal ideation doesn't have to necessarily stem from depression.
Okay.
So when we look at this from a certain socio-political context, right? So there are certain things and events that can put some people more at risk for suicide than others. So when you hear about somebody going through an immense debt, right, or some extreme event happening in the family, which they were completely fine before this event happened, and this event immediately right after that they ended up taking their own life. So that is not depression, right? So this is a particular area where depression is not the cause of the suicide, and this is where the socio-political cultural context would come into the picture. Like, if somebody is chronically economically deprived, if somebody is being a victim of abuse, so even in those situations the thought process would be that there's no way out of this situation, and the only way out of this sort of a situation would be to end their life. And but it is not depression per se which has led to it. There could be certain underlying personalities, there could be certain underlying factors, not even just trait, because that would become very stigmatizing again. I would say that certain situations in the external can always push you to an extent, right, where you see there's no way out. Um, like farmers, this whole thing that was happening, to say that every one of them was depressed would be wrong. It is like saying that none of those factors that were putting them in that spot were responsible. So that is not depression, but of course some of them could be, or we are speculating here. But when depression leads to suicidal thoughts and then behavior which once ends up in taking one's life, then it's usually severe depression. It's usually one of the indicators of severity of depression, where these thoughts start coming in. And initially, these thoughts might start with not wanting to live anymore, not feel like there's any purpose or reason why they're alive, to feel that they're a burden and not contributing in any way. And then gradually moving on to wanting to actually feeling that I am causing problems for other people's life, and other people's are in active pain because of me, or there's no way out of this, and then taking their lives out of that, not because of a weakness again, but more of as a there's no way out, and this is a way that seems the most logical in that moment, right? And so this is one aspect to it. And the other aspect is deliberate self-harm, where which is mistaken for attention seeking behavior. So we always come around certain teens, and even in movie shows you'll see certain individuals doing certain behaviors with where the family would feel that they're doing this to seek attention, right? And then they feel that that attention need not be given to them, or then they're labeled a certain way. And so that is deliberate self-harm. Sometimes when deliberate self-harm is happening, the person might not understand where is the limit, and then the lethality of whatever they're using could transform into something severe. So that also happens, and all of those behavior like depression leading to suicidal thoughts and deliberate self-harms are in itself indicator that the person is in distress and needs support, not attention, but support, and in the right manner, right? And so I think another factor I want to highlight is what you said about people with those happy faces not appearing depressed. So when we talk about depression, I think we create this whole image and imagery in our mind that this person is constantly going to be low. This person is constantly going to be either I don't want to talk to you, or be isolated and everything. That's not the entire picture all the time. So there are people who would initially at least mild, moderate symptoms, and if they've not, even within severe symptoms, if somebody is used to the being a public figure, they would still use their cognitive capabilities to sort of behave appropriately, what they see as appropriate in public, right? So people would still put on a mask, behave a certain way. So in offices, a lot of time, if a person is going at a lot of distress at home, individuals at office are hardly able to tell, right? That applies to a lot of illnesses where people can mask those behaviors. They can be high functioning, so that from what is important extremely and what is visible, there they are doing fine, but they're not actually fine inside, right? And that also comes in the context of like substance abuse. A lot of people are doing a lot of drugs. People assume that drugs kar rahe hain to office kaise ja sakta hai, ya this person is such a high productive person, could not be. But that's like this is where I think the dissonance is, that people believe that they need to fit in that box of what they are thinking, but that will not be there all the time. And my truest uh, fears and how I'm feeling, I might be more comfortable to about showing them to people I love, and I might not still put on like a brave face and be like a jolly person around other people, which would this is also another stigma, I think, or misconception that people carry, that a person has to look a certain way to be labeled as depressed or anxious or disability. Like mental disability would not be visible. You can't expect them to constantly be sad and then say this is a person who's depressed.
So when you spoke about substance abuse, like drugs or maybe alcohol addiction, right? My source of information has been these amazing podcasts that people have hosted. I was watching this podcast of Trevor Noah, and these guys were discussing about that how people get into the whole drugs thing, and how that kind of eventually makes them end their lives is because, especially if you're a performer now when you speak of it, and if I can connect back the dots, whether you are in the public domain or maybe you are like a high performing professional who's getting a lot of validation from their work, right? Performers get it from the audience that were in front of whom they perform. These professionals get it from their work. uh, there's a lot of high and ego high that you get when you are in that sphere, that also keeps you sane at the same time, right? But when that ends, when those working hours end, when that concert is over, and when you have to go back to your place, now since you have hit, you all your adrenaline rush and your dopamine is high, but after that you don't know what to do with that high energy, right? It's like, so far you were all, you were in front of people's eyes and everyone was praising you, appreciating you, going gaga over you, and the very next moment you have no one. And you are really clueless about that volcanic energy that is kind of growing within you. And that's what he said, that's what make people resort to drugs, so that they can forget that loneliness, they can forget that, now I'm in a space where I'm just with myself and there is no one. And I think they're not able to get that validation from within themselves only, right? So that just made sense to me, that this is why people get into drugs, and eventually sometimes drug overdose happen, because of which, they lose on their lives. But what is your take on that?
So, very relevant point in the sense that yes, certain occupations more prone to certain type of drug abuses or like substance abuses, but I think it's a pervasive thing and it's present at different in different areas. But maybe because we hear about celebrities more, we resonate with what has happened, we tend to remember those stories more. That's why this particular thing is associated more. But essentially what happens is that anybody who's drawn towards a mean of wanting to escape reality, which is what drugs is, you don't want to face the reality. It can start with curiosity. Yes, it can start with somebody pressuring you into it, or a certain curiosity, but that's not where the problem lies. The problem is more about the persistent use. So the one time use also sort of exposes you as that this could be a way to escape reality. So that's also a problem in itself. But the continued use is where the actual problem or the abuse starts happening. and the tolerance and the dependence starts building up. And where that is happening is that most of the time people are either doing it to celebrate their victories, to party, right, to sort of have a sense of high about life, or it's to escape from a negative event in their life that they don't want to face. And mostly, like, if people are doing it even to celebrate and all, it's more of a cultural context in which it comes in, right? You have to create a certain air around, oh, you can only enjoy your birthday if there's a champagne, right? But at the same time, the other thing where you are trying to escape reality, and then you take something which offers you that respite for a period of time, and then over a period of time other changes start happening in your brain, that your brain would not feel the same amount of dopamine release with things that naturally should give you a high, like achievement, like doing something consistently, putting in an effort, and then seeing your growth is supposed to make us feel happy. So all in place of that, there is something which you take and immediately you feel. And I think the human mind would eventually, over a period of time, would choose that also. And then other factors come into play again, because a person who is well integrated into the society, who knows how to process their emotions, who is well aware of how they're feeling, who has their sense of self developed about who am I, and where is my sense of identity is coming from, what are my true values in life, or what are the things that I truly value in life. A person who's established all of that, there's a lesser chance. With a person who is that's why people who are in the beginning of the early years is at a higher risk. Not that they're the only people, but they're at a higher risk, because that sense of self hasn't developed. Your sense of self is coming a lot from validation that you receive from outside, the high that you get from validation, and you're being praised and everybody's talking about you, and there's a lot of money coming in, and that money allows you to buy a materialistic thing, and then people envy that thing and you get joy from it. Or so all of that creates a structure. And a person who's not have a secure attachment, does not have a healthy way of processing their emotions, would tend to rely more and more on that. Not saying that it's bad for anybody, everybody enjoys it. But if that's not happening, somebody would, with the otherwise stable system, would go on to that system rather than relying on drugs for coming out of it or wanting to escape reality.
But what exactly is the psychology behind addiction? Anyone who is resorting to such ways, like, I get it that, sometimes we need to kind of escape reality. We just want to drown out those voices. We're not comfortable within ourselves. But what exactly is the psychology behind one where does that self-control, where do you blur that line of self-control? Because even when someone is taking it, right, I think the first time or maybe the second time you're doing it, you're aware that, this is my boundary and I'm not supposed to cross this, right? That control, at least I think we are aware of it, that I need to control it beyond this point, right? So what I'm trying to understand is that what is the psychology behind letting that self-control go? Like, what is that lack of self-control coming from, and resorting to this kind of escape?
So, addiction is commonly also viewed as a lack of control or a lack of willpower. But if you look at currently, like, addiction would fall under the purview of disease. It's an illness. And if you look at any illness, no illness is a matter of choice. Right? So you are right that when the substance use starts, it's usually a matter of choice. You are exercising choice. And that choice could be because of multiple things that influence your behavior. So the science behind addiction is very, very complex. And the science says that there are multifactorial reasons why anybody would develop addiction. So within the same family, there's a higher chances. Right? If somebody has addiction, there's a higher chance of another person. So that's where the genetic risk comes in. So that genetic risk is not in your control or my control or anybody's control. So if we've had a family member who's had addiction to anything, there's a possibility we might carry those genes. and develop it. The second thing is that if we've seen the environment where substance use is normalized, there would be a higher chance of you also using it as a recreational thing, right? So by like a certain norm, men were expected to drink alcohol in gatherings and women weren't. So that's why, like, because of that cultural barrier, women were not that prone to addiction earlier, or there were not as many incidences of addiction happening, because there was still a cultural barrier, and men were more likely to. But now that, because of that barrier dissolving, so now women are also ending up becoming addicted. So that's not because women did not carry those predispositions, but the culture also played a role. The exposure also played a role. The socio-cultural context also played a role. And this is where the individual factors come in and the personal factors come in. And then the environmental factors also play a role, right? So if you've had a history of abuse, if you've had a history of trauma in your life, if you've had a history of not forming secure attachments, then not learning healthier coping strategies, healthier way of releasing emotions, difficult emotions, then there's a higher chance of you relying on something which is unhealthy. And that unhealthy coping could be anything. Most likely substance becomes a common strategy because it's more acceptable. Certain substances are more acceptable than others, so which is why those are more used than others.
Tell me one thing, do suicidal tendencies, are they also related to the kind of attachment style one carries? Like, are certain kind of people, certain kind of personalities more prone to having suicidal tendencies?
Not directly, not as a direct, but yes, certain personalities or temperaments, because of how there's a way of thinking that you carry, or your way of interpersonal connectedness, or your sense of attachment comes in. So those can all determine, or like, even your impulse control, your emotional dysregulation, all of that could determine how you would react in a situation. And if there is a situation that comes in which creates an environment where that is more likely, then certain individuals with certain personality traits might have a more predisposition. But again, like, it's different for the deliberate self-harm I spoke about and the suicidal ideations we spoke about. So with suicidal ideations, more likely chance, even if somebody has depression, to do it. And with the deliberate self-harm, again, certain personalities are more predisposed to doing that sort of a behavior.
We spoke about depression, we spoke about suicidal tendencies, we've got in depth. But I also want to understand from you that what kind of help should one be reaching out for, looking out for, to get themselves out of this mess? What should they be doing? Like, what all should be in their checklist to do so that they don't reach that stage? Or if they are at that stage, what exactly should they be doing? What kind of effective strategies should be at the workplace as well? And how the families should be taking care of it?
So if somebody is going through any mental illness, and depression is a bit of it, then if you're going through an illness, it's best to reach out for help. If you're already in it, it's best to reach out to either a family member, or if you have the resources, reach out to a professional and ask for help. Get an assessment done, ask for help. Whatever queries you might have around whether this would work or how this would work, you need to ask directly to the professional, because everything is in an individual context, and a person who's seeing you within that individual context will be able to give you the correct answers. And if you are more focused on preventive strategies, which is, I think, what most of us should focus on also if we don't have the illness, because none of us is immune to developing it at any point in life, right? So if you want to focus on preventive strategies, one of the most fundamental is physical health, right? Because physical health is directly related to mental health, and mental health is related directly to physical health. So if you are in a good health, and your focus is like, you're free from chronic illnesses, you're free from chronic pain, you're free from any sort of debilitating problems that will come with physical health not being correct.
Right.
That can mitigate, like you modify a lot of risk. The second thing is, of course, like what we discussed, and circling back to lifestyle changes and ensuring like good lifestyle where you are and we rightly like brought in the sun in it, that natural light exposure is very important for your natural circadian rhythm, and to have that sort of an exposure on a regular basis to ensure that you follow sleep hygiene, you have good sleep, most days you are sleeping adequately, and there's a certain structure to your day, and you are focusing on things that are really important for you, which can be both. It can be personal growth and it could be professional growth, and building in connections in your life which are meaningful. They give you a sense of security and their comfort in it. So those human connections are very important, but at the same time human connection is also important. So people feel that being at home and just reaching out to close friends once in a while is sufficient, but no, we humans need to be in regular touch with other humans, be it at workplace, even if there are no deeper meaningful connections all the time. So we need other people. We are social animals, so those social connections should also be valued and respected and reached out for. And with that, like a wholesome, nutritious diet always plays a role, and then self-growth. And when we talk about self-growth, this is one area where a professional could also be of help, and this is also one area where you can also work on yourself. So to sort of identify what are your values, what are like in the long run, what would you identify more with, to create a sense of identity which is not based on fleeting things. To have a more solid foundation, to develop. Then I think emotional regulation is one important thing, that you need to learn to regulate emotions. You shouldn't be escaping from one to the other. And creating a respectful environment in general would do a lot well for almost everybody's mental health. If you're not living in a constant fear of somebody might scream and somebody might shout and there might be so we are not living in fear, and that gives a sense of calmness any which way. So making sure that the communities are working towards it, you at an individual level are working towards it, even as from a mental health workplace way. If you have that control in creating that workplace, you do that where, things are not constantly in a high fight or flight mode, where your employees are not constantly worried that this person might scream. At homes, that's not happening, where somebody or the other is constantly scared of not wanting to express their opinions, not knowing what to say, and walking on eggshells. So that sort of an environment change has to happen at like different levels. And of course, in spite of all of this, I'm saying there will be times when we develop illnesses, because like I said, some factors will be in your control and some won't be. And when any illness develops, it's always better that early intervention happens, because early intervention would ensure that agar you are allergic, you don't want medications, then that will ensure that minimal number of medicines, if needed, are given. Right? A severe illness would always warrant more stronger treatment. Then the second thing is, those are the places where psychological intervention could be really helpful. Right. So why not identify something at the initial stages and intervene so that the outcome is very well for everybody? That can be a take-home message for everybody.
Yeah. One question which I'm really curious to ask. We have read and we have seen a lot of dialogue on that, how psychedelics help in coming out of depression, right? If you can just break it down for the audience, that how psychedelics help out in depression, like what exactly do they do, and what is your take on psychedelic assisted therapy, and is it even legal in India?
So I'll start from this question, whether it's legal in India. Sure. Not right now. Sure. But there's there's a lot of research happening on this topic, right. And these treatment modalities right now do not have the go-ahead from regulatory bodies. Sure. Which is to say that there is evidence, but there's not enough evidence to make it mainstream. And to make it mainstream, we also need to look at whether it's helping. The data needs to be more rigorous about whether, cost effective wise it's helping. Then what are the long-term side effects that come in? What are the short-term side effects that come in? So all of that data is still in the initial stages, and these are not guidelines that exist at any these medical bodies which sort of create guidelines for treatment of illnesses. So, and how psychedelics help is that, psychedelic means it's a substance which is manipulating or changing the neurotransmitter levels in your body in such a way that for that span of time, it's not your body is not functioning as it would normally function. Right? So there's an intervention, there's an external input that's coming in, and that input leads to certain changes which has some effects. And psychedelics have long been known to cause that effect, which is why they are so popular. Also, people abuse and misuse all of that. But at the end of the day, everything is a chemical. And so it has been identified that certain chemicals in that also has mood elevating properties, helps with certain forms of trauma, like so PTSD also, and how to navigate those symptoms like flashbacks and alls and nightmares around that. This is a new modality which is being tested. So there are certain chemicals which are being identified, and that's where the science then focuses on and grows into better molecules. So with psychedelics, the focus is on micro dosing, not the dose people use to get a high, but the dose is micro dosing, which makes it's a more controlled manipulation happening rather than just a chaotic change.
And under the supervised, of course.
It is supervised, of course. And then that guided therapy means that within that procedure, you are certain areas or certain pressure, like points which are of conflict maybe, are being addressed under that influence. And that's how it's supposed to work. But it's too soon. Of course, there's like positive research that's coming in. So which means that, yes, maybe in the future we can have some of these molecules which work really well. And but right now it's not like there's no go ahead from any regulatory bodies. So most of these treatments are more like alternative therapies being offered, which is not a mainstream treatment. And again, there are mainstream treatments which are very well established and safety wise and tolerability profile wise. So it's better to, rather than going on a newer treatment, which is, we don't know the risk that might come in with it, it's better to first go ahead with the conventional treatments that are available. And then if there is something which is like untreated or something which is not responding to treatment, then these modalities are definitely like tried. Certain modalities, not exactly psychedelic assisted, but other modalities of treatment are also in, but they're not mainstream.
Right. Okay. One question that I skipped to kind of ask when we were talking about depression was, is depression the domain come under the conscious brain, or does it come under the subconscious brain? Or is it that that, like you spoke about the link between the conscious and subconscious kind of goes even, I wouldn't say missing, but maybe weaker, and that is the reason it comes out even more prominently?
So the brain is a whole, right? And the mind is a whole. And when we break it down into something, it's for our understanding rather than it existing as such with a division in nature, right? So when we talk about consciousness and subconsciousness, that's something that we've created.
For us to understand.
For us to understand, right? And no such structure within the brain exists. But yes, there are deeper, like whatever experience you go through, it gets stored. And somewhere it gets stored at a level of, in terms of what's the context of it and how relevant it is for survival. So everything that happens is in some way stored and sometime retrieved, and sometime that retrieval can happen consciously and sometime it cannot be done consciously, but can happen at other times, right? So that distinction all is very theoretical. It's created by us. But the mind per se, when you try to break down the mind as a building to identify that this is a block, which is the subconsciousness per se, doesn't exist. We haven't found a structural thing to say that this is a difference. So when we look at depression or we look at any illness, we have to not look at it from that distinction also. We can't divide it like that. It's more like a pervasive change. But as I earlier pointed out, there is a certain area that have been highlighted as to be of more relevance in mood. Certain areas more in relevance of attention and memory, and so those areas definitely play a major role, but are not the only system playing a role. So to create that distinction again is a very, you're trying to put in box something which cannot be put into a box.
Okay. So, we spoke about very heavy subjects like depression and suicidal tendencies, and I don't want to end on that note. So I thought, okay, let's also include a bit of little, non-heavy topics. So I just want you to briefly maybe touch upon anxiety, anger, and overthinking, because I think these three things have commonly been seen and have been prevalent now even more, right? Like let's kind of differentiate between anxiety as a disorder and anxiety as an emotion.
Yes.
Right? How does someone differentiate between that?
So I think this is of relevance to everybody who's listening to us, because again, anxiety and anxiety disorder are commonly confused.
Yeah.
And while anxiety is a normal emotion, all of us will feel anxious in a situation which is challenging, which sort of puts such a pressure on us that this is outside of our comfort zone, and this is outside of the context we've always had. And we need to have newer strategies to deal with it, would lead to anxiety. And anxiety means that your body is ready for a challenge and it's preparing. So those are the symptoms that you feel, that your heart rate goes up a bit, your breathing would become a more shallow, and you're sweating a little bit more. So all of those changes are to prepare you for what's ahead of you.
Right.
But if that anxiety for some reason goes out of that regulation and overflows, right? So that overflowing can happen in multiple contexts. Either it's a situation that's supposed to make you anxious was there,
Right.
and now it's not there anymore, and you're still getting that anxiety.
Okay.
Could be a sign of anxiety disorder. The other thing could be the symptoms that are happening. They are too much. Right? So if your heartbeat, your heart is beating so fast that you're feeling palpitations.
Okay.
And you're becoming this uncomfortable, and there's a discomfort in your chest, and you're then started feeling like tightening in your chest or pain in chest, almost similar to a heart attack. So sometimes panic attacks can resemble a heart attack. Right? And that severity of a reaction happening is an anxiety disorder. It's not a normal anxiety. Okay. So, and again, the anxiety then translating into biological function dysfunctioning. The purpose for which the anxiety is happening is now not being served. So, to give an example, like if I am nervous about coming here, right? Most of us are during exams have felt that nervousness and felt anxious. That's a normal response. Then you'll be worried about key result matters, and I need to study, and what have I prepared? Am I prepared enough? Right? But if, let's say, it becomes to an extent where I can't sit still when this thing is happening, or when I'm preparing for it, I can't sit still because I'm constantly like, what will happen? What will happen? Right. What will I do? During an exam, certain kids experience that before exam, they can't sit still, they can't sleep, they can't eat. Some people have like gastric manifestations where they would need to use the loo, right? And that is sort of becoming problematic for why the anxiety was. So it's lost its purpose as useful to dysfunctional, and it's caused problems. So this is where it's become problematic, and it could be an indicator of this is a disorder and needs intervention. You need help to manage that level of anxiety.
Okay. So in the same way, also, how does one differentiate between productive reflection and overthinking? Because certain people, when they start to think, they get just lost in that train of thoughts, and they don't realize that now it's actually they're overthinking.
Yes.
Yeah, so where does one draw that line?
So I think overthinking is when you're going in loops.
Right.
And introspection is more like, you are looking at a thing more critically, and you're looking at at possible outcomes. You're looking at possible interventions that can happen. You're looking at from a logical perspective, right? And overthinking means that there are multiple things that are running in your head. There is no direction to it. And that's also like, it's happening over and over and over a period of time. So mostly when we either overthink or there is introspection happening, we want to be prepared for a situation, right? But if it's not helping with the preparation, then it's overthinking. It's dysfunctional. And you can't look beyond that point. Like, for example, if I have a meeting and I am overthinking about that, or if I am reflecting on that, but because of which I can't focus on the thing that I'm doing currently. That means, again, it's not a healthy introspection, because that will be more in control. That will be more of a controlled way of evaluating things, looking at things, coming up with possible explanations, also possible outcomes, and how you integrate that with where you are. But overthinking is running in circles without too much of a change in facts.
Right.
You are constantly thinking scenarios without like really coming up with any solution for either of them.
Okay. I've heard that anger, of course, we've all heard that, anger is bad, but I've also heard that anger can be healthy also. Would you like to touch upon that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this topic. And yes, I think anger can be very, very productive. Anger can allow you to see where there's injustice. I think certain, especially like being a female, I feel females are not expected to be angry, right? And that's why a whole range of emotion it's denied to you. You're supposed to not feel anger. You're not supposed to respond in anger, because that's not an emotion that you should be. And on the other hand, men in general are not encouraged, but sort of it's acceptable. And that also becomes problematic, because so the anger per se, the emotion is not problematic. Like we've talked about, no emotion is problematic. Everything has a purpose and is a range of human experience and needs to be experienced. What becomes problematic or healthy or unhealthy is the behavior that's coming out of that anger, right? And mostly when people say ki anger management and gussa mat karo, what they're actually telling you is ki react jaise kar rahe ho aap us pe, wo becomes healthy or unhealthy. So if you look at an angry, like if something is making you angry and you're able to regulate your behavior, and it's coming out more of a thought of behavior with a certain intention in mind, then it's a healthy expression, and that behavior needs to be of course a healthier behavior. You're not beating somebody, screaming at someone, breaking things, or being aggressive, or and if that behavior is leading to changes, you're standing up for your boundaries, you're saying that this is not acceptable, you're going ahead and creating a more secure environment for maybe yourself or other people around you, I don't see that as problematic. Even though the person, if you're coming across and putting boundaries, it might not really be okay with the person where you're putting the boundaries with, or if you've not responded in that manner ever, then just the change throws people off, and they might say ki. So if two people in the family, one of them comes in angry, throws something, but because there has been a consistent pattern, nobody would bat an eyelid. And if the other family member who's usually docile, very calm, let's say starts screaming, would be seen as, what's wrong with you? Yes. True. So I think that also creates that what we see constantly, we sort of create, our brains see something which is commonly happening as normal. True. Although it's just common. If it's common, doesn't make it normal.
True. So true.
So that's where it needs to be differentiated. And whenever you are feeling that your anger is problematic, maybe, right? You need to focus on, how can I acknowledge this anger? Where is it coming from?
And what do I need
and
to do?
In actions, what is the behavior I would rather not do, which would probably cause more problems for me? And what is the behavior that I would like think through and create, which sort of eventually leads me to where I want to be?
Okay. Is there any connection between anger and inflammation?
Anger and inflammation, not directly, like not as an anger leading to inflammation, but of course, like people who can't regulate their emotions and who have extreme anger or not a right way of regulating their emotions, and who rather than feeling sad, they'll be angry, rather than feeling. So again, like I think the imposed gender norms make it's acceptable for a certain gender to not be sad. They can't cry, they can't be sad, but they can be angry. So that sort of a chronic anger, chronic, emotional dysregulation can definitely lead to inflammation, can lead to, like I said, cortisol changes. Further, like there's a risk of heart attacks or stroke happening.
So how does anyone who is suffering with anxiety disorders, or maybe, stress, overthinking, anger, what exactly they should be doing? What are the things to do for them?
One is slow down.
Okay.
I think anxiety or anger, any of these emotion in general, uh, makes people more impulsive. There's a tendency to react immediately. If you're anxious, we want to run away from that feeling because anxiety is uncomfortable. And to run away from it, we do behaviors which might be in the long run be unhealthy. Right? You can, some people drive rashly. Some people would make a call that wasn't supposed to be made. Some people are anxious and they'll get angry and scream at somebody.
Yeah.
So, firstly, identifying what is happening with you. That there's an emotion, there's a tendency or wantingness, you're wanting to react. First, slow down. See what's causing that, what's stirring that thing up in you. Break it down. What behavior in others led to that? Was there a trigger? What is this in any way coming from somewhere else? And then thinking that if this is my anxiety, then you need to learn to validate also yourself.
Sure.
But at the same time, learn to calm yourself. So self-soothing is something that everybody needs to learn. That
Right.
at times you will be anxious and there need not be anybody else to soothe you down or calm you down. You need to do that yourself. You need to regulate your breathing. So this is where meditation or mindfulness, all of that comes into picture, where you try to be more and more present in that moment. You notice yourself more. You notice your breathing pattern. You look at your thinking. You objectively start looking at yourself rather than being too emotional into it. And also like seeing emotions as waves of ocean, and this thing where, you're standing somewhere, waves might come, you don't have to flow with them. You can stand where you are, not give in to it, observe it neutrally, and letting it pass. So that sort of a thing would first initially allow you to understand. And I think for any of these emotions, understanding where it is coming from is half the battle. And then bringing in changes. And to bring in changes, I would say pause. Because if you want an alternative behavior, it won't happen all of a sudden. If you've been conditioned to react in a certain way, behave in a certain way over years and years and years, then you won't suddenly think, now I will react differently and be able to execute it. So you have to pause. Before that, you just have to be like, okay, now I will take my time to think about how I want to react to this. And then take that time before the new behavior, you're able to make it as a reflexive thing that comes in.
Right. Any last words that you'd like to tell the audience on World Mental Health Day? Anything that you'd like to leave them with?
So I think the important thing that I would want to say is that mental health is absolutely important, and it's not a sign of weakness in any way. I think for the longest time, people have thought of mind as being different from the body. It's all, again, a theoretical thing created by us to understand things better, but they're not separate, and there are multiple ways in which there's an overlap. And if you want to live a holistic, like healthy life, you can't ignore an important aspect of, your health, which is your mental health. So please stay healthy, take care of yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sneha, for doing this with us. It has been an absolutely enriching conversation with you. I really hope that, it reaches out to right people who need to see this. And I really hope that it helps them. So thank you so much for helping them with us. And you're doing a fabulous job. Keep at it. Wish you all the best. And hopefully, we'll do again one more episode.
Thank you so much for offering me this opportunity. I think, we always want to have more awareness, but to give a platform is very important. And thank you so much for choosing this important topic, because I think it's been neglected, even though their voice is coming up. And thank you so much, to the entire team also. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. And a big thank you to all of you guys who have watched this till the end. Like Dr. Sneha also said, mental health is very important. So don't let it reach that point where now you feel that, now I need to see a therapist or a psychiatrist. Mental health practices should be something that you should integrate into your daily life. Have a lifestyle like that. And it starts with self-awareness. So start on that journey, and please share this video with people in your circle that you think it can really help them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. And please press the bell icon for further updates. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much.